Hey everyone, this is Michael Angel with CDSoundMaster, CDSoundMaster.com. CDS is classically defined sound. So this is the next video in the series on R2R Reel-to-Reel. So in this video, I'm going to be talking a little bit more in depth about each of the different machines. And I will be including a link to the manual so that you can check it out and read at your own pace. So the Studer A800 MK3 is considered one of the best 24-track machines ever made. This specific machine is near mint. This is using what it is calibrated to, the Ampex 499. The Atari MDR10 is a 1/4-inch 2-track, and you have it at 15 and 30 IPS. That again is using the Ampex 499, but also the ATR. And the B77, the Studer Revox. Something that I think is worth mentioning is that bass players absolutely love this machine. Now, people that are into some retro stuff, some Beatles stuff, a lot of different things draw people to the Revox. I personally think that it just sounds great as a workhorse tape machine. There's something that it articulates in the low end that is just absolutely wonderful, and it gets a little bit of that click and pop and oomph that overlaps with the harmonics that is just really beautiful. And I've had many people write me and say it's so awesome to finally have this in software that it absolutely nails the sound, sounds identical to their Revox. In fact, I actually have one person that had the Sony as well, and they gave me the same feedback. They're like, this sounds identical to mine, and I can finally retire my tape stock. So people, they're very happy about that the same way that I've been. So a little bit of interesting stuff on the Wallensack. It's a stereo tube design created by Wallensack in partnership with 3M and Revere. Now, Revere used to make like Prosumer electronics, and I mean, these were things that were even used like throughout the school system. So it was fairly widely spread. It runs at 3.75 inches per second. And that reduced sound, along with the tubes, is why you get a very unique signal of there is a slightly lower frequency response from the lows and the highs. There's not as much, but also the harmonics enhance the entire spectrum. So it's just a really unique sound. And the 50s Lafayette is running at 7.5 inches per second. It was really a fun experience trying to track that one down and find it. I found somebody who was from another country that was quite the audiophile. They had these wonderful giant custom-made speakers, and we spent a lot of time listening to their different reel-to-reel machines that were not for sale. So it was neat to get something like that from a home where somebody really appreciates it. So the Sony, we have it at 3.75 and 7.5 inches per second, as we do the Akai, those two settings as well. So this program right here is the 15 IPS low of the Stu A800 24-track 2-inch MK3. And let me explain that 15 IPS is 15 inches per second, as you would probably assume. And here's the information from the manual. This is the dynamic range from very quiet up to a maximum analog 0, or the unity gain setting. So let me explain. You are not being instructed to use the 15 IPS low for quiet recordings of yours. You don't have to match low to low, mid to mid, high to high, based on your own volume. The tape machine, because you're dealing with unity, which is the least amount of distortion and the least amount of hiss, everything downward in volume in tape has a reduction of fidelity, meaning that you could actually have misreading of harmonics if you're not recording it correctly. And a lot of people are not aware of this. They think that harmonic distortion is anything that varies from the frequency, but it's not. You want distortion that's actually distortion from drive, from an overdriven signal, an increase in gain. So in this case, the low setting is as quiet as you can get. It's below negative 60 decibels. In analog, we count from negative up to 0, and then you could have as much as even plus 12 above 0. If you're calibrating to negative 18 dBFS, then you can imagine that would be plus 18 is an absolute max for analog. Usually you have something between 22 to 27 decibels of headroom. So with tape machine, if you have hiss as the noise floor, and if you had something as quiet as 50 or 60, negative 50 or even 40 decibels, you would absolutely hear a lot of hiss. So getting those levels, the idea is to get it as accurate as possible for the frequency spectrum and the harmonics. So what I decided to do was to separate those into low, medium, and high. Medium is about your standard everyday use of the tape machine, where low it gives a slightly different calibration, bias, and personality at that range. So just use your ears, listen, and if you hear something you like, load it as if it's the same volume as anything else. You're just getting that range of characteristic of the tape machine. So you can apply the same to the 15 IPS mid, where you don't have to use it for different volume settings of your own material, but you're getting that most standard range of the tape machine. Not extremely quiet, but not much at all above unity gain. When it comes to the higher 15 IPS, we're talking about between 3 and 6 decibels above unity, and sometimes if I can push the machine more, I do. What you'll notice with the sound is it starts to kind of warm up, meaning that the spectrum is starting to bend a little bit in the highs, and you'll have a little bit more harmonic energy in the low end, kind of a bump. You don't necessarily always see it in the frequency range. And sometimes that energy will actually cause a rippling effect in the actual recording. You can see it from the analog device. It's not something that is an accidental response in digitizing it, in trying to create convolution. You see a lot of different unique things happen. But if I were to separate out just the harmonics, you would hear a little bit. And if I were just to separate out the spectrum, you would hear a little bit. Put those two together, and you get an extremely unique signature. I personally like intentionally warming things up, intentionally adding harmonics. That's the reason that I came to tape. That's the reason that I'm using it to color the sound. So, and then, of course, 30 IPS, the idea here to get a cleaner signal. And the trade-off in recording was always, fidelity, the highest accuracy, but it was, very expensive to buy 2-inch reels. And when it goes by twice as fast, you get half as much program material on it. But the fidelity of tape is all based on the amount of surface area being covered in a signal. And so if you had something running at 7.5 inches per second, you can pretty much get the full frequency range, but you're going to have to calibrate the machine a little bit to make up for the difference. You can use the A800 in your mastering, your main outs, if you would like to. Your main mix, or you can use it on mastering. People have done it before. The main reason in the studio that it wasn't used that way is because it was maximizing the number of tracks that could be going at the same time. But of course, now that the Stu A820 is included, you have that as a mastering deck that you can choose. And it has very unique sounds at 1530 and at NAB and CCIR. So we have the 15 IPS 499 at 0. So our 499 is letting you know that that is the tape stock that you're using. And you're going to hear a lot more difference from the Atari at 15 and 30 with the 499. And then we have the ATR, which is just a slightly different sounding tape. And being at quarter inch was very standard for mastering tape machines. It's plenty for the high-end machines to get a full fidelity. And something that I would mention about OTR, the Atari, because you have this in software form, feel free to use it on your tracks. Don't just use it as a master out. You can use this just like any other tape machine. You could use it on 20, 40 tracks if you wanted to. The difference that I would describe, where the Studer leans towards the warm side with a nice little bit of a bump in the lows and highs, but it rolls off nicely in the higher gain. The Atari is very clean, but it's also very spacious. You're going to hear that it is really good at articulating instruments in their stereo field. And a lot of people have noticed the same thing that I've noticed with that. So you have your different programs for your 499 and your ATR, and you'll notice that you have your +6 programs, 15 inches per second, ATR 6 decibels. So that would be similar to the high setting on this too. With the Revox, you have 7.5 inches per second and 15 inches per second. So here we have the Revox. We have a 7.5 inch running the 499 tape. We have the 7.5 all the way up to 6 decibels. We have the ATR, and the ATR doing the same thing up to 6 decibels. Same explanation here. You could hear the different tape stock. I felt that it was beneficial for you to be able to have those options. You may prefer the sound of the 499 over the ATR. It's your choice. Okay, so we have kind of our prosumer line, and something that I'd like to tell you about the Akai is that this is something that I read somebody that did a very obscure article about how this was their secret weapon for guitars, because it definitely has a noticeable, audible, high roll-off. And it just so happens to be right where you start to get the bite and edge of some of the better microphones. Like if you're using a really good condenser to record a guitar amp, as opposed to a dynamic that might grab the energy from the mids stronger. This is a great machine for just, instead of using EQ to roll off, what you're doing, you're not just using the spectrum, the frequency response of the tape machine, but you're warming it up with harmonics that work beautifully with thick rhythm guitars while rolling off at the same time. So you're getting this wonderful, complex, enhanced sound. So the Maxells were always known as being really good formulas for this machine, and items like the Sony that's included. And, you know, tape stock, the UDXL was kind of considered like one of the higher quality. Then you have the Scotch 206. With the Akai, it just goes up to the 7.5 inches per second. And you have the several different tape formulas. Each of them is marked on the version that you load. You see the high S PR150. So that's the hotter signal running your Sony PR150 tape. So same explanations for these. Once you understand what the terminology means, it's very easy for you to gravitate towards your favorites. So all the same explanations for the Sony. It's wonderful. It's warm in a similar way to the Akai. I personally find it that it's really great if you have a song where you want to break it down into kind of a lo-fi reduction before you go full scale again. But it's also really good for warming up vocals. You know, this is not one where you want to use it for your linearity. Revox, Atari, Studer are all incredible for your full range, you know, full quality mix tracks and mastering. I think of the Akai and Sony as just play with it when you're looking for high fidelity, but not totally clean, not your total full range. It's wonderful for warming up a lead instrument, for a lead vocal. If you want to have a very front-end pop vocal, but you want to have a warmer background music, it's great for that kind of thing, to use it on the backing vocals. And so now we have the wonderful Lafayette radio using Max UD3590 tape as the Maxell. And this is an all-tube device. It is really good if you wanted to actually create reduced lo-fi effects and even mix the distortion with this with other distortion plugins. You can get some really unique sounds. Don't overlook this just because it is more of a lo-fi, older sounding machine. And it, you know, sounds very different with the Scotch and the Quantity 456. The Lafayette is a 1950s device, and the Wallensack is a 1950s device as well. This is a different kind of warmth, a different kind of, if you accentuate the sound in the mids and use a lo-fi sound, this, in my opinion, has a much smoother version of that. It's more rounded, but I just love using both of those. Just take your time to go through the manual. I think that you'll find there's some other interesting things to read. I hope that you've enjoyed this, and especially it's going to be fun. Once I've covered everything with R2R and TB+, we're going to start doing a lot of listening, and isn't that the whole point, really? So thank you so much for joining me, and please subscribe and share, ring the bell so you get notifications. Visit with me on Facebook. I'm going to put the link there and the manual and a couple of other things in the description of this video. So thank you so much. God bless you, and bye for now.